Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to episode 1 of our Python course for beginners. And in this episode we'll be looking at data types and variables. Data types and variables are the fundamental building blocks of Python and will be very useful in the future when it comes to operating and working with data in your programs. So to get started, let's create a new file right here. I'll call it episode1.py. Make sure to add the .py so it recognizes this as a Python file. Now let's just write in the code from last time right here. Print hello world. As you may have recognized, print will just display what is inside in the console when you run the program. So it's displaying hello world right here. Now, what are variables then? Variables are a way to store data, and to make a variable, you choose a name you want to store the data in. For example, let's say phrase. If you say phrase equals hello world, we are giving the value hello world to phrase right here. And make sure to have this in quotation marks so it recognizes this as an actual phrase. I'll be getting into that later. But right here, phrase is given the value hello world. So if we, instead of printing hello world, print phrase, exactly as it is up here, it will do the same thing and print hello world. Now this is very useful for storing data, as now we have hello world in phrase and not just as a loose piece of data, so we can use it multiple times. We can just print phrase again and it does the same thing with the same value right here. Alright, now we'll be looking into data types. So there's 4 basic data types we'll be looking at in this video. Data types are just, as the name says, different ways to classify data, and you'll be using a different data type for different functions. The 4 basic ones we have right now are integers, which are any whole number, as you might know from math class or whatever. An integer is just a whole number, can be negative, can be positive, can be 0, it can be quite long over here, and you'll be using these a lot. You can also perform operations with integers. If you look at printing 1 plus 5, as you might have guessed, that gives you 6. If you want to do 3 times 5, that'll give you 15. You can also subtract, divide, all sorts of basic operations you can do with integers. Next value is a float. When you want to, instead of working with whole numbers, work with decimals. So float is just a decimal. It can be anything you want, 2.1, 0.5. It can be negative, it can be positive, as we've said. And similar to integers, you can do operations with these floats. So 0.3 minus 0.2 will not give you 0.1. Well, this is sort of a problem with Python. It's decimal math is not very good. There's explanations behind it, but I won't get into it. It's sort of a rounding error, so be careful when you're doing float math, because sometimes you'll get results you're not expecting and that might mess you up. But we'll be looking further into that in the future. For now, just know that most of the basic operations with floats you can do and work. Just make sure to look at the results to see that they're what you're expecting. the next data type is a string. Now a string, we've already seen, is just any combination of characters put inside of quotation marks. You have to put quotation marks or else it does not distinguish a string from a variable or whatever. So make sure to put quotation marks around it, and whatever you put quotation marks around is a string. Also a number in quotation marks is still a string. And contrary to integers and floats, you can still do operations with them, but they will have different results. For example, if I print hello plus 1 as a string form, it'll just put them right next to each other and print hello 1. This is called string concatenation, and we'll also be getting further into that sometime. Right, you can also multiply strings. Hello times 5, or okay, 6 I guess. We'll just print hello 6 times like this. This is useful for some repetitive tasks that you don't want to do. But you can still do operations with strings. And the last data type is a Boolean. Now Boolean can only have 2 values. It can have the value true, or it can have the value false. Make sure to have a capital T or F here, and not put this in quotation marks, or else it'll see it as a string. And Booleans are used usually for expressions and for logical statements, so if something is true, stuff like that, and we'll be looking at that in the next episode, so stay tuned for that. Now we have a way to show output, which is printing. As you've already seen, you print parentheses, and whatever you put inside of these parentheses will be displayed, although maybe not exactly as you put it. For example, strings don't come with the quotation marks. What's interesting is you can print multiple values out. If I want to print my float and I want to print my integer, I can do that, add a comma between the two. The space isn't necessary, but I think it looks better. You run it, it will print both values with a space in between. Float, integer, now I want to do my string. It'll add my string here. Let's just change this to make it more obvious that it's a string. Yeah, and you can do that for as many as you want. This is how you display things. And looking on the other side, on the input side, now all of the things we've done have just ran from the code we've put in. Now what do you want to do if you want the user to have a choice or be able to give input to the program? Well, you can use the input method. So let's say we're asking the user for their name. You can put name equals input, and inside here, like a string, like a print statement, you put whatever you want to display. For example, enter your name. And now we have the name value that was given by the user. And since we've now learned how to display multiple values, let's write print your name is name. Alright, now let's see if this works. Enter your name. My name is Jacopo. And it displays that right here. So now you can write programs that take input and do something based on that input right there. Now, one thing to note here is that when you ask for user input, whatever they enter is taken as a string. So name will be a string, as you see when you hover over it here. So if you ask for something like their age or any number, you won't be able to do math on it just yet. We'll get into how you can do that sometime in the future. Additionally, when you add a comma, it'll automatically add a space in between when you print. If you don't want a space here, you can just add a plus and concatenate these strings together. So now, when I write my name, it won't have a space. If you want a space, you can add it here, and it'll do basically the same thing, but you know, sometimes you want to use a plus instead of a comma in here. And now we have a little challenge. Try to just make a program that prompts someone for their name, their age, and one extra value of their choice, and then, you know, just writes a little greeting, acknowledging them and telling them all of their properties. We'll get back to that. Alright, so if you have something like this, then you've done it correctly. You know, I'm just prompting them for their name here, for their age, and I chose to go with how many kids they have. And right here, I just print all of this data with some strings. Right, so let's say my name is John, I'm 25, and I have 2 kids. Alright, we have hello John, you're 25 years old and have 2 kids. So this is exactly what we were looking for. Hopefully you have something similar to this. It's fine if you used commas instead of the pluses here, or whatever you did. In this episode, we covered the basic data types and variables in Python. We explored integers, floats, strings, booleans, and learned how to work with variables here. Also discussed some basic input and output with the print statements and the input statements, which allow you to interact with your program. And remember to practice this stuff if you need. You can come back to these examples, or you can go further by yourself. If you want, you can try looking at some basic operations and just experimenting with them. You know, how plus, minus, times, and divided just work with different values, because that's something we'll be looking at more in the next episode. And yep, next episode we'll be looking at operations, control flow, specifically if statements, and more, which will allow you to write more complex programs with different paths, let's say. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.